You're listening to the Save the Date podcast, where we talk all things weddings, jewellery and romance. With love from Cullen Jewellery.
Hello and welcome back to the Save the Date podcast. I'm Sheridan.
And I'm Juliette, and we are so happy you're here.
In today's episode, we are going to talk you through writing your vows. So there can be a lot of pressure sometimes put on making your vows so perfect, which is why we have kind of condensed all of the biggest and best tips into this episode. At the end of the day, writing your vows should be fun and yes, of course, maybe a little bit emotional, but it should come easily to talk from the heart about the person you love.
So sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it.
So the first thing to remember, and that a lot of people might not know unless you're kind of really far into the wedding planning process, is that you actually don't have to do personalised vows. At least here in Australia, you definitely don't. You can just do the vows that are required by law. And here in Australia, all it is I call upon the people here present to witness that I take you to be my lawful wedded wife, husband, or spouse. That's literally all you need to say. So there's no pressure if you actually don't want to say personalised vows. You don't want to have to go through that process. You don't have to. Your marriage is still going to be legal.
Yeah. Even time-wise, you may have a preference with, you want the ceremony to be short and sweet, and you don't want to go into that stuff too much. I mean, all personal preference, and you definitely do not need to have these long vow speeches.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like you said, if you do want to keep your ceremony like short and sweet, you can always say your vows privately at another time, not during your ceremony. So I know that there's a lot of people lately that do their vows during their first look, or some people will do like a first touch where they don't actually see each other, but they'll just hold hands like around a corner or something. And they'll say their vows then, which makes it, I guess, a bit more personal. You're just literally talking to the person that you're marrying rather than saying it in front of everybody.
A lot more intimate.
A lot more intimate, yeah. So you can do that like on your wedding day. You could do it after the ceremony if you wanted to, or even some people will just take the vows completely out of the wedding altogether and do them like on their honeymoon.
Oh, that's really sweet.
Yeah.
Which I think, like completely private from the day.
Yeah. It just, makes your honeymoon that little bit extra special where you're going to, share your vows.
If you did want to include it in the ceremony, you can also just turn the mics off or whisper it or even maybe go to a separate little area so you can still include it in your, wedding ceremony without everyone hearing it. If you do, if you still want it to be private and personal, but you don't want to cut it out completely of the ceremony itself. Yeah,
which I think that's nice as well, just still being in the ceremony, but it being that little bit more intimate and personal. I guess something to keep in mind with that is that it will, I guess, feel a bit boring for your guests because obviously if you're doing it the traditional way, I guess, and saying your vows during the ceremony with your mics on, then your guests are kind of included in that moment as well. Whereas if they're kind of just having to sit there, try and see if there's something that they can do at that time, whether it's like you're handing out your confetti or something. You have someone handing out confetti while you're doing that, just so that your guests, stay a little bit entertained while you're doing it.
That's a good tip. I like that.
Yeah. So if you do choose to do personalised vows, there are a bunch of different ways that this can be done as well. It doesn't just have to be purely like privately written and said for the very first time to your partner on the day. So the first thing that you can do for this is to actually write your vows together and say the same thing. So like with the legal required by law vows that you have to say regardless, you both say the exact same thing. So you could just kind of add something else on, come up with a few promises and things that you want to say together, and then you'll both just say those same things.
Yeah, I like that. I feel like that's really nice. And then I feel like that also puts you on the same page with what you're saying. And I guess it's really cute as well to be able to write them together.
Yeah.
And then later on, maybe if you wanted to say different things to each other and make it a bit more personal, you can do it in the speeches later at the reception instead. But I think it would be quite nice to have the same one.
I think it is as well because it's, like you kind of said, it's like a special thing for you to do together, and it's like a nice thing that you can do in the planning process that will actually make you and your partner feel closer together rather than like just trying to pick out what you're going to spend your money on. It's like a time that you can sit down and just spend quality time together talking about the life you've spent together so far.
Yeah. And I suppose if you did still want to make them slightly different, you can still incorporate that aspect and maybe just do some like dot points with each other where it's like, okay, we're going to touch on, you know, maybe something from like when we first met, something from like the middle of our relationship, and then present, or, you know, just like some main dot points again. So you've got the same sort of vibe going and like one person's not going really deep and sentimental and the other person's kind of just like, you know, keeping it quite simple and whatnot. So I think that's still important regardless, that you kind of at least touch base with each other so you are on the same vibe.
Yeah, I think so as well. It's definitely whether you're going to write them completely separate and do them that way or whether you're going to collaborate. I definitely think it's important to just have at least one conversation about, hey, like, are we just going to completely roast each other? Or just to say like, hey, I really don't want you to tell this story that happened because I know that you will, but that's off limits for the family.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah. So just... it doesn't have to be this big scary thing where you kind of just sit separately or do them, you know, without each other. You can make it a little bit more collaborative and have fun with it together.
Yeah. And I think that still keeps the surprise element because I guess some people might want that still, that, you know, they don't want to hear what their partner's going to say to them at the altar, which is, again, also really sweet. But yeah, I feel like you can still find a way to make sure you're on the same, like they're going to be similar without spoiling a surprise.
Yeah, because the last thing that you want is for you to say something really heartfelt and like loving and romantic and then your partner just doesn't. If you're familiar with the TikToks, then you might know what I'm referring to because there's definitely been some uncomfortable vows said.
Yeah, that's just awkward for everyone.
Everyone involved, yeah.
You don't want that.
Definitely could have been avoided with a quick conversation beforehand.
Absolutely.
So moving on, what to actually even put in your vows, there's 4 main things that we think are super important. And the first one, which might seem like a little silly to say it, but is actually to say I love you. Like it seems like a no-brainer that you would say I love you in your vows, but when you're in that process of trying to write them and there's so many other things you want to say, you're not sure what to include and what not to, it can just get forgotten.
Yeah.
So definitely make sure that when you're like trying to figure out what to put in there that you like underline I love you.
I love you. The number one thing to put in. The next thing is actually sharing a personal story. So maybe, something you guys had to work through together. Still, I think making it really sweet and lighthearted. Don't obviously put anything that's going to bring up some, I don't know,
drama,
unsolved feelings. But some kind of little sweet story that I think is still something your guests would also enjoy, but also that is really sentimental to you and your partner. I think that would be really cute and a nice thing to include.
Yeah. And then the next one is to explain to your partner in some way that you'll be there for them no matter what. I think it's pretty inevitable that in a marriage things are going to go wrong. You're going to disagree on things. There'll be bumps in the road, but in your vows, just reiterate that you'll be there for them through it all and that you are kind of a team now. So you're going to be on their side, playing on their team.
For better or for worse.
Yes.
The next thing is to actually make a few promises. So I guess that kind of links to the last point. But making those promises that, you're going to be there for them through thick and thin, no matter what. I think there's just this certain element of, I don't know, it just making those promises in your wedding vows just brings those to a whole new meaning.
Yeah.
And I think they're like one of the most important things to include.
Yeah, 100%. Like I was kind of saying before, it can be easy to get wrapped up in all these other things that you want to say and sharing all these stories. But it's important to remember that your wedding vows, like your vows are your promises. So make sure that you do include some things that you vow to do, that you promise to do. And these don't also all have to be romantic and sweet. You can kind of have fun with them a little bit. So You can say that like you're going to be your partner's biggest supporter even when they're too scared to kill the spider in the room, or or you promise to laugh at all their jokes even if they're bad ones or something. Like it doesn't all have to be really serious. Yeah, they can all be lighthearted. Now, moving on to actually writing your vows, we have a few more tips that will help you with the process from right at the start all the way through to the finish. So the first thing that I would recommend is starting writing your vows early. As early as you can, the earlier the better, but at the very least you want to start writing them a few weeks before the wedding. It just gives you enough time to actually write them, rewrite them, process what you're saying and change them up if you need to.
Yeah, and just go back to them, reread. Because, sometimes when you've written something initially, you're like, oh, yeah, this is perfect. And then I'll go back to it in a week and be like, what was I thinking? Yeah. So, like you said, it kind of gives you some wiggle room and some time to refine them, make sure you're 100% happy, and, not feel rushed.
Yeah.
That it's like this last minute thing that you have to do and it's quite an important one and you don't want to disappoint and you only get one shot at this, hopefully. Yeah. So, give yourself plenty of time.
Yeah. And then start with a list of just a bunch of things that come to mind. So you could start this like 6 months before the wedding of if you see something cute that, relates to your relationship, write it down, just have, a note on your notes app on your phone and just start writing little bits and pieces down of, that relate to you and your partner and also how you feel about marriage in general. And then when it comes to actually writing your vows, you've already got this big list of things that you can kind of pull from.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really good idea. Just like dot point some stuff. Even like myself thinking about like some of my best ideas strike at 1 a.m. when I'm lying in bed and I can't sleep. Yeah. So like you can just quickly get your phone and like write it down so you don't forget.
that was how I wrote my first draft of my vows. I was stressing about it because I think it might have been like 6 weeks from the wedding and I was stressing about it because I couldn't figure out what I wanted to write. And I'm laying in bed one night and it was, probably like 11 o'clock or something like that, trying to fall asleep. And I was like, oh, I know it. I've got it. So I was sitting there literally for the next like 45 minutes. My now husband is like sleeping next to me. And I'm just sitting there on my notes app.
Like look at it the next morning. It's like illiterate, like just not spelled. Go with the good old voice memos as well. You can just talk and...
I've done that with so many random things in the car for me driving home. I'll have been driving for half an hour and I've got like a pretty long drive home and I'll just set the voice memo because I've got so many things going in my head. So
otherwise I'll forget.
Otherwise I forget about it. Yeah. And that also I often go back to it. I'm like, what am I talking about?
What was I thinking? Next tip is writing more than one draft, which I guess, again, kind of comes back to what we were sort of just saying, that, the first time you write it probably won't be the final, what you're actually going to say. So, give yourself a few different options. Even like with those different drafts, maybe you can include different points. And then again, you can come back after a week and see which one is speaking to you the most.
Yeah.
Or, if you want to combine a bunch and refine it and continue to do that,
Yeah, definitely. And with that as well, like if you've written a few different drafts and you've got different points in each of them, don't try to include all of them in your final draft. Like you can always save some of them and tell them to your partner later down the track. You don't want your vows to be like absolutely jam-packed full of 100 different things that you're trying to say. Keep them shorter and simple. I would recommend about 1 to 2 minutes. And then, like I said, you have the rest of your life to share all of the other thoughts that you want with your partner.
Yeah, or the speeches later in the night.
Or
like
the speeches,
we said. Especially, exactly. That's probably more of a thing to keep in mind if you're thinking of including a short story.
Yeah.
That, if the story is getting a little bit too long and lengthy, maybe save that one for the speeches at the end of the night. And try and find something else you can include if you want a little story or something that is
Yeah.
funny.
Or if you're like tossing up between two stories and one's hilarious and one is, a little bit funny but not as funny, then include the hilarious one in your speech later.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure it will probably land way better.
Yes. Receive better.
Yeah. And then the last thing for this point is, if you're not usually like a super sentimental person, writing down your vows can feel really cheesy and like a little bit just weird, especially if if you're not usually the couple that will sit there and tell each other, oh my God, I love you so much and I can't stop staring into your eyes.
Literally me. What's it like with your like love language? It's like physical
words of
touch.
affirmation.
Well, that's not for me.
If your love language is not words of affirmation, writing your vows is going to feel a little funny, but just try not to think about that too much because they're not cheesy. Like, I don't think I've ever watched anyone's vows like online or in person or anything and been like, oh my God, they were so cheesy and cringy. I can't believe how much they just said they love their partner.
Yeah.
Like they're the ones that are generally like nicer and more emotional when you're like listening to them.
Literally me thinking about what I'll have to say on that, like embarrassed, like don't look at me. I have to tell you I love you.
You're like turned this way. Not wanting to
Everyone
see them
watching
to
me.
their face. Yeah. It's like they might feel cheesy, but other people definitely don't think that they are. And like, even if you're second guessing them or anything like that, your partner is going to love them regardless. So yeah, don't get caught up in feeling like they're too cringy.
The one exception. Your wedding day.
Yeah. Okay, now we have a few more tips to help you out with actually executing your vows on the day and making them sound as best as they possibly can. And the first one is to practice reading your vows out loud. You might be surprised just by how differently some things sound out loud versus like when you're reading it on a page. And some parts, because of this, might just need to be tweaked a little bit, whether it's how you say something. It doesn't necessarily mean that you won't be able to include that in your vows, but you just might have to tweak it a tiny bit for it to make a bit more sense and come across verbally, I guess.
Yeah. Even if it's like, sometimes it's just the sentence, like can be a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
So like if you're up at the altar and you're probably going to be a little bit nervous, you want to make it as easy to say as possible. And if it's a really bit of a tongue twister type of sentence, maybe change it up a little bit just to make it a bit easier for yourself.
Yeah. And like overall, this is going to make you feel so much more confident saying them on the day as well, because you are going to be so emotional and probably very nervous. Like it's a lot standing up there saying your vows. So at least if you've read them out loud multiple times, it'll almost be like second nature. And it just kind of helps to avoid you from like just flying through them, saying them too quickly, stumbling over your words a little bit. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but yeah, it'll just help you feel a bit more comfortable while you're doing it.
Yeah, and like you can absolutely, if you need a little like cue card or something, just, if you are a bit nervous or you don't want to forget anything, like that's perfectly fine. But yeah, practice, it just comes more naturally.
Yeah.
And you won't have to, I guess, look down as much if you still need those little cue cards or something like that. Just makes it flow a lot better.
Yeah. This next one is to send both of your vows separately so that you don't see them if you don't want to a trusted source. So this could be like your celebrant, for example, or your officiant, just so that they can read through them both. If you have decided to literally say nothing to your partner about your vows, if you can send them to somebody else, they can just read through them, make sure that they're on the same kind of wavelength, the same vibe, roughly the same length, so you don't have one person speaking for 5 minutes and the next person speaking for 30 seconds. That'll just kind of make the cohesiveness of the day run a little bit better, for the ceremony at least, so that your guests, like I was saying earlier, so your guests stay entertained throughout the whole thing.
I like that. That's a good point.
I
feel like even if you had written, or if you do write them together, I suppose that's a little bit different, but you could still just get a second opinion from a celebrant, because I guess they would obviously be quite experienced with people saying their vows. And it's great to just be like, oh, what do you think of these? You know, do you think we should include anything else? It's, even if you and your partner both know exactly what each other is saying, it's still nice to get a second opinion.
Yeah, definitely.
And try not to overthink anything.
Yeah.
It's, just let it come. What comes, just let it happen.
Yeah. Like we kind of said before, your partner loves you for who you are. They're going to love hearing, how much you love them. So yeah, try not to overthink it. It's all going to flow perfectly in the end. It'll be beautiful. If you cry, you cry. If you don't, you don't. Now, lastly, on your wedding day, you want to have a freshly printed copy of your vows, or consider reading them from a vow book. Your celebrant might have this. Ours did. They had their own vow book that they printed our vows into. The focus, I guess, on the day is obviously not on the way that, you're holding your vows necessarily. It's on the words themselves, but it'll just make things look a little bit nicer in the photos when you're looking back on them. If you've got, a nicely, freshly printed page or nicely in a little book, rather than like a crumpled up piece of paper
handwritten
that you've been reading from.
Red ink.
It's got your like crosses and
scribbled out. I like that idea. And you can even make it like really cute and have a little card with like a picture of you and your partner on the back or something. Like, why not?
Yeah, exactly.
Make it nice and photogenic.
Yeah.
And we kind of touched on this before as well, but I guess one of our final points is, again, try and take it as slow. Try not to rush through your vows, which, comes with practicing them, because, you just don't want to word vomit your vows and, have it just be something that's, really rushed, I guess, on the day.
Yeah, 100%. You want like your partner to be able to listen to what you're saying, not just, have word vomit coming up.
Even for people listening, I suppose, if you do have your mics on and everyone's hearing you say your vows, it's nice that people, to speak clearly and for people to really appreciate what you're saying.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're going to cry, just let the tears fall. Don't, try and hold them back or try and talk quickly so that you can get everything out before you start crying. Just, it doesn't matter. So many people cry on their wedding days, like, you're allowed to cry. It's an emotional time. So just let the tears fall if they have to.
Yeah, for sure. And just pretend like it's just you and your partner.
Yeah.
If you are a bit of a nervous public speaker, just zone out, zone into the bubble of you and your partner and just let it come to you.
No, I like that, definitely. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Save the Date podcast. We hope you learned something new, and if you're currently planning your wedding, congratulations, good luck, and have fun.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you follow and subscribe and leave us a review wherever it is you are listening.
Make sure you come and connect with us on our socials at the Save the Date podcast and our Facebook group, the Save the Date community. We would love to have you there. We hope you have a wonderful day or night, and we will be back with another episode next week. Bye.
Bye.